Welcome to Faith Talks, a program that looks at issues relating to faith, God, and life today. In today's program, we'll be looking at faith in an economic crisis. How do you get through that? How do we as a country and how do we as individuals get through that? In the studio today with me, I have Marinko Markek and Deborah Harris. Marinko as a lecturer and as an academic in the business world, and Deborah as a chartered accountant and as a board member. Both of you have a long list of credibility to be here with us today. And I'm going to start asking you, Marinko. We've been hearing that we are in a recession. What does that mean? Is that just a fancy word the media is using?
No, it's not a fancy word. It refers to a sort of negative growth in economy, which occurs over 2 quarters consecutively. So if for 6 months you don't see actually positive but rather negative growth, technically that's a definition of recession.
And I guess I see, when I look at the news and I hear that more and more big companies are actually closing down. We see the high streets and many British villages and towns are becoming more and more empty of shops. What does that mean to me as a person? Should I be worried?
Well, I think everybody should be worried. I think no one can afford not to be worried because it's now a worldwide phenomena. And the consequences of what's going on in the world economically certainly may affect each one of us.
But Deborah, what is going on in the world economically since we are in this recession?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for inviting us to talk about what I think is a really interesting topic. The issue of an economic crisis or recession, it is quite challenging, especially in countries where you've moved away from a basis of hard manufacturing to a lot of service industries, or where your retail industry is very much based on imports as opposed to, so there are more products coming in to be consumed by us rather than products going out, because ultimately enterprise is around being able to make money on what you offer. So if you're dealing with the economic crisis such as the one we have here, where you have a lot of service businesses not earning as much money as they used to, then you find your economy is being challenged. I think that as definitely as a board member and as someone in business and who talks a lot with a lot of people who have their own businesses, it's a really trying time. But I also find that some of the comments that people talk about, never wasting a good crisis, is one of the areas that I think that if you have any sense of innovation, this is an opportunity for you to think about ways of doing things smarter and better. In spite of what's happening around, there are always, and people always say, there are always ways to innovate and make money. It may be harder, but there are always ways to do it.
I think that goes very well with some recent research coming out on the BBC that in the last 2 or 3 years, it has had a 60% increase of people starting their own businesses. So obviously, some people are benefiting from the crisis. But why are we in this crisis on a global front? Why should I be tied in with money in America and money in Greece or wherever it is? Why should that worry and affect me in my little town?
Because we are all now interconnected. No man is an island anymore, and wherever you live, if something happens in the world, you will be affected in one way or the other. The reason why we have such a big crisis, the reasons are well known. I don't think we should repeat them now in the studio, but it all started in America in 2007, 2008. And because of all these toxic products that big investment banks put in the market. So somebody in Germany who bought a product from an American investment bank, which later on became worthless, of course, that all had a knock-on effect on a number of companies. If I'm a bank in Germany and I have a lot of securities on my portfolio and I fail as a result, and if you are a small business owner in Germany who expects to be supported because you have a product that is good, that you have an export market, but you can't get finance, you'll be affected in your family. So you see how everything is actually well interconnected, and one thing influences the other. So the reason is, of course, that, as they say in many cases, the so-called real sector is completely separated from the sector of finance, which became kind of world of its own. And now it's the question of how to put them together again.
The issue that, just to interject here, I remember seeing a very personal story of a janitor, so a caretaker of a local school, this is in America, who had followed what he was called the American dream, and he'd bought a fantastic house. And you're talking about the toxic products, a lot of them were based on mortgages. Yeah. Mortgages where you would say how much your income was, and no one actually went and actually checked whether your income was at that level. And this particular janitor had bought a massive home and had said that I can make the payments, but hadn't looked at or clearly understood or even thought about the future, where the payments would change from a small percentage to a much larger percentage. And I remember watching that programme and thinking, oh my goodness, how could someone have possibly given a mortgage of that size to someone knowing that they were on a particular level salary? But when people are self-declaring and declaring inaccurately what their income was, and when there was more money to be made by doing these sorts of products than something else, you can see how these sorts of things snowball, especially if you're doing this massive race to profit and profitability. And I remember talking about this with a colleague of mine who was a solicitor. And they were saying that their mortgage payments, or their mortgage interest rate were coming up for a change, and they were moving from a particular rate, let's say it was 4%, and it was changing to 8%. And they said, oh, well, it's only going up 4%. And I said, no, it's doubling. And just that simple understanding of what it means from a personal financial perspective, and people not having, I believe that there has been a lack of understanding at the very basic level of financial literacy, just an understanding of what it means. And I think there are changes to address that. But if you have a lot of people who really don't understand finances and another group of people who can find it very easy to make money from a circumstance, you're looking at a recipe for disaster.
And I think the point is, as with everything, whatever you do in life has consequences. And if you have a lot of people who don't understand and don't want to be educated in this area, then what you really have to do in place is systems and controls that will prevent them and people who want to lend them money, from taking irresponsibly upon themselves obligations that they cannot fulfill. And if you don't have a system in place that will, and you don't have at the same time understanding and awareness, then this is what happens. And in many cases, the system was designed in such a way that it actually encouraged rather than discouraged irresponsible
But doesn't what
lending.
you've just said almost smack of becoming a nanny state, where people, if they don't take their own responsibility for becoming financially literate, then the government puts in place systems to protect them? Where does the whole idea of becoming responsible for one's own for one's own future?
But I also want to say, it's one thing to be financially illiterate, because, most of us go through our training in schools and through growing up, and we have not been taught how to read financial statements. We have actually not been given the skills to do so. But again, you hear so many times, oh, you need to read the fine print. And it also seems that sometimes you can be as financially literate as you can, but there's also people who are trying to kind of make money out of you not being able to read the financial language.
My view is that it is about defining your wants rather than needs in a way that is perhaps irresponsible. And if you define what you need in life as opposed to what you want, and you clearly define sources of income for what you need, and you keep this perspective all the time, then it's unlikely that you will need specific technical knowledge of finance to reach some basic decisions in life. But very often people have been tempted by easy credit and availability of resources without taking a long-term view and assessing the consequences, hoping somehow that things will not happen the way they have happened.
We believe a little bit sometimes in the miracles that the paycheck will double at the end of the month, don't we?
So it's the issue of, I think, character and personality and perhaps values rather than lack of knowledge.
But you're also talking here about personal responsibility, and that's what you were saying as well, Deborah, that, you can't just stick your head in the sand and just think things are going to go well. You have to, as you're suggesting, live within your means, isn't that? Yeah. And today we probably are a little bit too easy with the credit cards. What do you think?
I love credit cards. I have absolutely no problem with credit cards. And it just as if I eat food, I like the knife. It's a tool in people's hands. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Knives don't stab people, people stab people. Credit cards in and of themselves don't put you in debt. It's how you use them that gets you into any particular issue. But just coming back to what you had said earlier around not being taught about finances in school, and this isn't being taught necessarily how to read financial statements or financial pages, but just understanding the ideas around income, expenditure, what an asset means, what a liability means, how they all four of these areas of income, assets, liability, expenditures, and how they all work together. And then coupling that with what Marinko said around where do I want to be, what do I want to do, short, medium, long term, and how to plan for them. And that is something that is very lacking. We do talk about physics, chemistry, biology, English literature and maths, and I feel that a good solid understanding of finances is key, and the earlier the better that people learn. And I do feel that any opportunities where people can learn this and apply it for themselves will make them understand that credit cards are not dangerous. It's in the hands of people who, because I see credit cards as a wonderful way of taking up an opportunity, but you have to understand how you want them to work in your life.
And I also think, one thing is in the credit cards, one thing is how we learn how to manage our funds and manage our self-expenditure, or however you want to explain that. But in a faith setting, in a church setting, a lot of times the only thing we're taught about finances and economics is that we are to give to the church. And if we give to the church, everything else will be fine in my personal life.
I would caution against this almost automatic or sort of default option. I don't think you can always find the causal nexus between these two events. I think what people should be taught in the church is how to define what is good life. And if you base your definition of good life on consumption of all sorts, then sooner or later you'll find yourself in trouble, because economy changes in cycles. You have good times, you have bad times, and people who are not prepared, who don't have the foundation right, will find it difficult to cope in the bad times if the definition of life, what is good life, the purpose of life, is based only on material things linked with consumption. I think this is the heart of the problem.
I was sitting in a church service one day, and the priest minister was standing up and he was saying, remember, give, you need to give until it hurts, give to the church. And there was a dear little old lady sitting next to me, and I heard her muttering. She was first of all muttering, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Mm-hmm. Because ultimately the churches pay for the ministers, they are their staff. And then she went on to say, well, if money is so bad, why is it that they seem to want so much of it from us? Mm-hmm. Why is it that they're asking for it? And I think that you almost do have a financial conflict of interest with your minister standing up and saying to you, now dig deep, the plate's being passed around, or give to those who need it, because that is a lot of the funds through which the salaries are paid. However, there is something about our ministry and laity who have the skills that should be front and centre, saying to the church members, let's understand what we as believers understand when we talk about money and the right use of money, and the idea about planning for the future and not making, because people say, oh, money's the root of all. No, the love of money has always been seen as the root of all evil. So in my mind, I think that we really do have to, I think churches have a role to play, just like schools have a role to play. And maybe the focus has always been on the giving, but sometimes the focus is, and I feel that the focus could be balanced so that we understand that how we as people of faith work in the getting and the building and the investing and making sure that we have a short, medium and long-term future. The statement that I've heard which says, do your financial plans as if you'll never die, but work and seize opportunities as if you'll die tomorrow. Then I think that's a good approach to take when it comes to understanding finance.
That's a good approach, but I still want to challenge both of you on saying, well, isn't it a lack of faith if I want a financial plan? Am I not then saying to God, God, I don't trust that you're going to provide for me? Because if I'm a person of faith and I pray hard enough, God will put those extra pounds in my pocket, won't he?
Don't be silly. Seriously. I hate hearing those statements from people who say, oh, I'll just do it and the Lord will help and the Lord will show the way. The Lord does not ask you to race out into oncoming traffic. We all learnt well, maybe showing my age, we learnt the Green Cross Code. We learnt to look in the right direction when you're stepping out in traffic. That we understand the issue that if you fill your body with toxins or things that are carcinogenic products, cancer-causing, you're more likely to become ill. If you don't do things to help your financial health, if you fill your life with the carcinogenic products of a lack of understanding of finance, a real pressure to make money because you've not done well. And there's nothing more desperate than someone who needs to make the money because they need the funds to deal with the day-to-day, the heat, light and dial tone. Because those people will take silly decisions and will often, and we've seen it time and time again, where an excellent place to go and do a financial scam is in a church setting. Because people are far too trusting. They say, oh, well, the Lord will provide, or I was shown that if you give me this money, the Lord shows me how to double it. You wouldn't do that with your children. You wouldn't give your children out to strangers. You wouldn't do that with your health. Why do it with your money?
I don't think you can abdicate your own responsibility.
Absolutely.
I think God will provide if the circumstances are such that perhaps you can't control things or your own planning and effort cannot be sufficient to meet the situation. But to use this statement as a complete replacement and abdicating your responsibility, I think it is irresponsible, and I wouldn't advise anybody to do so. I think, but you need to go back again. I just want to emphasize the issue of fundamentals, like in economy. If the fundamentals are not right, then everything else will be wrong. So in a time of crisis, when things happen beyond your control because you lose your job or things just happen the way you cannot control them, it's always worth remembering who is ultimately in control, who owns the resources. And I think, yes, there is a value in learning to depend on God, but when you can and while you can, of course, you have to put your own effort.
Well, just going back to what you were saying around the fundamentals, whenever I've spoken to people about financial literacy, I've always said to think about it as an upside-down traffic light, the UK-style traffic light, so red, amber, green. So if you turn that upside down, the red are the key emergency things that you do have to think about, and that's your income and expenditure, addressing and handling what sort of debt you have. And it's the same in businesses as it is for an individual. If you do not have those fundamentals right, so understanding what you've got coming in, what you've got going out, any debt that you have, you've got very shaky ground on which to do the amber, which I see as a sort of the medium term work, which is around your savings and any sort of investments. So at the red level, the basic, I say colour red because it's an emergency, it's critical that you get it right. It's what are your emergency savings, the putting a bit of money away for a rainy day if you can afford it. And if you can't afford it, how do I increase my income or reduce my expenditure? The amber level is very much, once you've got that sorted, the amber level I see very much as any sort of medium-term savings. And then at the green level, which is, go, that's the level at which you have really a clear understanding of your financial path, the plans again, and that's when you think about the longer term investments, the sort of businesses. A lot of people say, for example, start up a business because they want to earn loads of money, rather than they understand how to manage their funds, they've got a little bit set aside, or they've got contacts and they know how they can generate income from a business idea. Because those people who buy into a business idea or a franchise, you always have to outlay. And if you don't have the bedrock of a good understanding of your income and expenditure, a good understanding of how to save the medium, short and long term, you're in a hiding to nothing because you're juggling three things at once.
And I want to support this. I mean, one of the clearest examples in the Bible, I think, is when Jesus said, well, you won't start the war unless you have really carefully analyze your chances, or you won't start building something before knowing do you have enough funds. Of course, he was talking about the gospel and that you don't want to commit to something and then halfway through say, oh, that's not for me. But this has a wider implication. Absolutely. And it could be applied to our own personal lives. And it's one of the probably strongest arguments in favor of planning as opposed to saying, well, I won't do anything and the Lord will provide.
But then again, we hear that, and you had a very strong reaction to the whole Lord will provide. But are we using as Christians then faith as a bailout for our personal responsibility when it comes to finances?
I think some people do. I wouldn't say this is a widespread phenomenon, but some people do. Again, when I go to churches, I would hear stories, something like, I have a mortgage, but I really haven't taken any life insurance on it, or the house is not insured because I trust that the Lord will keep me safe. And I'm not saying it won't, but sometimes things happen. I also am very, very surprised when I hear stories, and I've met somebody recently who is going to the States, and I said, look, have you taken your health insurance? Oops, no, I haven't. And I told him a story about a lady who some years ago became ill on the plane, landed in Los Angeles, and they discovered that she had a brain tumor. They had to operate on her, and the bill was about £300,000. Now, the home insurance here wouldn't, the insurance here in the UK wouldn't cover the bill. So that was a very expensive shopping. And sometimes people go on trips, they trust the Lord, and things could go in the wrong way. So I don't think it's a widespread phenomenon, but some people operate, and I think it is not always without risks.
But how else am I testing my faith? Is it not just God who's testing my faith when I come into economic crisis?
Your faith may be tested if you lose your job and you've been through 100 applications and there is no positive response. You may be. Economic crisis is just one of the things that can be really thrown upon us. Ill health, personal tragedy, but do you really want to go out and deliberately test God in this way when you can do something about it?
See, my view is a comment that says, a rising tide lifts all boats. And in an economic boom, it's a rising tide. You don't necessarily need to think about ways of making money. The jobs are there, the opportunities are there, the house prices are rising, so you can buy a house, slap a few bits of paint on it, and sell it at a profit because the prices are rising. A good, astute person is able to make their own financial ends meet if the economy is going up, down, or sideways. So if a rising tide lifts all boats and a falling tide exposes the barnacles, they've always been there, and it's for us to say, well, let's plan for whether irrespective of what happens, let's do the planning. And I feel that there is a place for faith. It should be central in what you're doing, but it's not the sort of faith that you're saying, you throw everything up in the air and say God will provide, because he won't send angels with a wad of £50 notes to leave on your door. The whole issue, and I've always understood that miracles are not given to people who believe. They're usually the miracles that I remember, the ones that are given to people so that they can believe. If you do believe, then your faith should be applied in being able to identify the people who can help. So the person going on holiday, as far as I see it, you were an answer to even an unspoken prayer, to just remind someone, if you're going somewhere where your health cover, where you don't have health cover, put something in place. It may be a small outlay, but I'd much rather prefer to pay £50, £150 for some health insurance than £300,000 plus the cost of repatriating a loved one from overseas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think economic crisis is an opportunity, it's not a threat. And it's an opportunity for Christians to restructure their own key assumptions about the economy and personal finance. And very often these assumptions are driven by the idea to have a good life, living standard, which may or may not be affordable. So in a time of crisis, I think it's good to stop, reflect, and perhaps readdress some of these key assumptions about how we use resources.
So how would you do that? What are some of the key assumptions that you see, that you meet, both of you, that people take for granted that is owed them, that they might have to re-evaluate.
That you're owed a job, that you're owed employment, that you're owed. If you have been brought up in a society where there is a lot of social care, as opposed to a society where if you don't work, you won't eat, it's often very easy to get into a mindset that I'm owed a job. So when you are, as you say, applying, sending out 100 applications and not getting any responses or positive responses, there's this "why me, Lord?" or "God doesn't care," or all of those statements. Whereas the normal process, everybody understands if it's job hunting, that the process is no, 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 yes. And it's that nothing comes easy. Everything is hard work. So if you've been brought up in a boom period where everything was easier, there's often an opportunity to think that life is easy. Life is a struggle. It's a challenge, and there are good opportunities to find ways to look positively, as you've said. Don't waste a crisis. To look positively at the challenges. So you're not owed a job. You're not owed finances. We do have to work hard.
What are some of the tips that you would give here at the end of the program to how can people live through the economic crisis that they're facing on a personal level? What are some practical ways forward? What do you need to look at to help you move out of that rut if you have ended up in that rut?
Well, I think the key assumption, as you said, is that what do you base your security on? If it's your job, your career, your profession, your status, then you may be surprised because these things come and go. Once this is addressed, I think what you can do in the meantime, perhaps you can reassess your spending pattern and adjust them. You may have to redefine your priorities. You may have to make a distinction between what I want and what I need. And these things are not necessarily painless. They can be quite painful. I think you need to look into yourself honestly and say, well, what I'm doing, is it right, and how I can change that.
Well, I want to say thank you very much, Deborah and Marinko, for actually giving us some practical tips and insight to how we can live through a financial crisis, and also how our faith is very much key in how we live through a financial crisis. And if you who've been watching this program have been affected or want to join in the conversation, why don't you send us an email or join us on Facebook for a further discussion where you'll also find more resources should you wish to do so. Well, thank you for watching.